DevOps Overview. So what's a good definition for DevOps? Here's one. DevOps is short for Development and Operations. It concentrates on collaboration between developers and other parties involved in building, deploying, operating, and maintaining software systems. Now, DevOps didn't appear by magic. A lot of people put a lot of thought into the practice of DevOps. And one of those people is Patrick Dubois, a Belgian consultant, project manager, and agile practitioner. He made a presentation on 10 plus deploys per day, Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr. And this helped to bring out the ideas for DevOps and resolve the conflicts of it's not my code, it's your machines, the constant conflict between development and operations. And so DevOps blends lean thinking with agile philosophy, and you know what? It works. Overview of DevOps. One of the key tenets of DevOps is that software development is an ongoing activity. It really never ends. There's always new requirements and there's always new work to do to meet those requirements. But there is a consistent pattern that appears in the interaction between Dev and Ops. And this pattern is plan, and then after we plan, we create, and then we verify the things we create. We package it up, we release it, we configure the environment to accept the release, and then we monitor what goes on in the environment after the release happens. So DevOps is an agile relationship between development and IT operations. And again, as we learned previously, DevOps is an abbreviation for development and ops. And DevOps includes the planning, the creation, the verification, and the packaging of deployment artifacts. And also, operations includes release, configure, and monitor. So you put them together and you get the continuous cycle described above in the illustration. And we're going to take a look at the details of each section in this continuous cycle in slides to come. So if you remember earlier, we described that Agile and DevOps are very, very closely related. So it's good to have an understanding of the details of how Agile works. And so that's what I'm going to go into now. Okay, Agile starts pretty much with the product backlog. The product backlog is all the things that business wants to get from the software development teams. And again, it can be infinite. And as we know, those of us that have been in the business understand business always wants more. And that's what they need to do. They need to want more because that means that people are demanding the products we make. So as more demand appears, we have to increase the product backlog. But we can't do everything all the time. So we have to decide what we're going to work on during a given period of software development. And that's called sprint planning. And what happens in sprint planning is typically the leadership from the software development teams, someone from development, someone from operations, someone from QA, someone from business, and someone from products, and others will get together and they'll look at the backlog, the product backlog, and they'll create a priority. And they'll say, okay, in this sprint, we're going to implement features A, B, and C. Now, the trick about Agile is Agile understands that software development can go on forever. And so to address this problem, because nobody wants to spend money for projects that go on forever, Agile practitioners, what they do is they time box a sprint. And typically a sprint will last anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. Some companies do 1 week. Some companies actually do 4 weeks. But the notion is a sprint is a time boxed period of work where what happens is what happens. And a passing sprint means that all the products from the backlog that have been introduced into the sprint have been created, shipped, and deployed. That's considered what's called a passing sprint. A failing sprint is one when not all the work has been done. And failure isn't necessarily bad because what happens in a failed sprint is there'll be what's called a retrospective. As a matter of fact, most companies do retrospectives on all sprints, whether they pass or fail. And in the retrospective, they'll say, gee, we failed the sprint, which means we didn't meet our commitments, and there must be a reason why. And what the Agile team or the DevOps team, anybody who's touched the software, what they'll do is they'll get together and they'll examine what happened and they'll figure out how to improve the process and how to improve the work practices so that indeed the next sprint will pass. And this might mean actually reducing the number of features to be implemented in a sprint, or it might mean introducing automation techniques, a whole lot of stuff. But the important thing to understand here with regard to sprint is that a sprint is a time-boxed period of time in which development activity will take place. And that includes development, testing, release, user acceptance testing, anything that goes from getting a feature set out of the product backlog and into production. Okay, and so as I mentioned, what will happen is the Scrum team will do its work. It could be anywhere from 1 week to 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Rare, I've never seen a situation where it goes beyond 4 weeks. And every day the teams will meet to talk about the status of the sprint. And this is really important because one of the key features of DevOps is communication. That the notion, if you look at the Agile manifesto, it says really talking to people is better than specification. Not that specification isn't important, but what you want to do is you want to get the teams talking to one another on a daily basis and hashing out any misunderstandings that might occur or offering solutions or improvements to the way things are happening. And that's good. That's what the daily stand-up does in the Scrum team. Okay, so everything happens, and as I said, either the sprint will come to an end at its period, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and at the end they'll say, okay, here it is. Did we pass or fail? And this typically happens in the sprint review. And in the sprint review, as I mentioned earlier, if it's a passing sprint, everybody, they have candy bars, they'll have coffee. If it's Friday, some companies will have beer, but they celebrate, okay. And if the sprint fails, they'll do, in part of the retrospective, will be to examine how to learn from mistakes and make improvements so the next sprint passes. And sometimes companies will even have a beer Friday even if the sprint fails, because we want to foster what's called a blameless environment. Not that things go wrong and people aren't accountable for what happens, but we don't want to waste a lot of time with finger pointing. If you did this, things would be better. No, if you did this, things would be better. Remember, it's that part, operations says the code's not very good, and the developers say, no, operations isn't responsive. That blame mentality, it's not really good. So part of the review is to have a blameless process where people really come to understand what is good, what is bad, and how to improve and how to ensure success moving forward. Again, and that's the merging of the Agile sensibility into the fundamental practice of DevOps.